Mythic Earth. This is the Tribal Nation Starter Pack. We're not going to be doing an unboxing. We don't do a whole lot of that right here. But just to show you what you get in a starter kit, this is somewhere around, I want to say like $75. Look around on Amazon, you can find it. The kit I saw on Amazon costs a little more, but where this one comes with 18 figures, that one comes with, I want to say 21, including the General. You need that General, a couple of bodyguards in this box, and look at these three big Sasquatches. There's your monsters, their beasts. So 10 warriors, 5 shooters, General, 3 beasts. You're ready to go. Like I said, we're not going to do an unboxing. Instead, I want to do a deep dive into the concept of alignments. In our last episode, we ran through a demo game and talked a little bit about alignments at the start of the game, but focused more on the 5 M's: movement, missile, melee, magic, and morale. We didn't do magic. We'll talk more about that today. The fact that the game is effectively a D10 roll-under system, and that otherwise it operates much like any other game. Where it really breaks the mold for miniature wargaming is to provide this right out of the gate. You got to make a choice. Are you going to follow the path of the ever-living, or are you going to follow the path of the ever-changing? It's a simple die roll at the start of the game, and if you win that die roll, you can either pick which scenario you play, and that determines the primary objectives, or you can pick which alignment. Are you going to be ever-living, or are you going to be ever-changing? And today, now that we understand how the game flows, we can talk more about why this choice is so critical. And it's critical for 4 reasons, and we'll talk about them in this order. It's critical because you get power-ups, one-time uses, power-ups that you can use based on the path that you wind up with. It matters because secondary objectives that you can pursue are dependent upon which path you are on. Your spellcasters have different lists depending on which alignment they are in that battle. And then if you have one of the big behemoths, they have additional power-ups that depend upon the alignment that you're in. Before we go into this in any real depth, I should point out I am trying to understand this. I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate an understanding of the alignment system to better plan my games in the future. I have not played a full-blown game yet, so a lot of this is speculation. I say that out of the gate. A lot of influencers, particularly the D&D guys, you know, they go, oh yeah, I read it, I figured it out, let me tell you exactly how it plays, and they've never played it, so they don't really understand. I'm wearing my, I'm nailing my colors to the mast here. This is purely speculative. I'm thinking through this on the channel, and if I've gotten anything wrong, please, by all means, correct me. There's a comment section right down there. We're low-key. Go for it. So, with all of those out of the way, now let's talk about how the alignment system works. And the first thing I want to talk about, as I said, is the blessings that come from which path you're on. These are mutually exclusive, by the way. Oh, shoot, I almost forgot. Before we get into that, I do want to talk about what a clever design this is. In games of this sort, where you are building army lists that are very complex, it's very easy to find those, well, I shouldn't say it's easy, but it's possible to find those game-winning, game-breaking combos. By adding this key rule suite into the game, you tell the player you don't know what you're gonna get. It makes it very hard to plan for one specific strategy, for one specific scenario, for one specific play style. You have to be flexible because you don't know what power-ups you're going to get. Some of those combos are going to work great half the time, and half the time they're going to be useless. You have to kind of plan around not knowing which of these you're going to get. Very clever. It's an interesting way of providing balance and balancing army lists, because sometimes your army's going to get a way better, and sometimes it's not, based on which alignment it winds up with. Okay, now we can talk about what it means as far as the blessings that you get. Blessings are one-time power-ups. You can use one per turn. That in itself is a very interesting design choice because it encourages you to spend these things. Now I'll pause here. You can type these out on a piece of paper. You can print the rules out, and they're listed right here. The other option is to use cards, which are available from mythicamericas.com. If you go to mythicos.store, they've got all these on sale. And so it makes it easy to track which ones you have and have not used. You got the 6 cards laid out. You just flip them over when you've used it. If you don't use one of these on the first turn of the game, remember, games last 6 turns. You've got 6 of these. If you don't use it on the first turn, you're not going to use all 6. So it's definitely a use it or lose it system. And I like that. You'll be tempted in some games to just hold on to things until I really need it. Don't do that here. Use them. Very clever design. So as I said, let's look at the difference between the blessings that you get for the ever-living way versus the ever-changing way. If you're ever-living, here are the 6, and I know it's a little hard to read here. After a friendly unit is assigned to unit activation, add back D3 models to that unit. So that's a healing spell. Automatically pass a brave test. So if you have to make a morale check, you automatically pass. Once in the game, you get that automatic pass. Cancel an enemy's countercharge action, meaning when you dive in, they can't hit you back. After any friendly unit is assigned a unit activation die, make a move for free. So somebody gets a free sprint. A heroic figure can attempt to regroup a friendly unit within 20 inches, not just 10. So again, you're giving guys a boost to their recovery. A lot of these are healing and morale bumps. And then the last one is remove D3 unit brave status markers from a friendly unit. All right, so those are disruption markers. Removing D3 of those gets them back into action. It makes sense. Ever-living blessings are more heal-based and more courage-based. Now let's look at the ever-changing blessings. And those are change one of your unit activation dice in your unit up by 1. So you're going to be highly motivated. This is loosely described, kind of a chaos situation. When taking a brave test due to losing combat or suffering from shooting, ignore the brave status markers, right? So they're still on there. Your disruption markers stay. You're just more likely to remain in the fight. Before taking any unit activation test, ignore all unit brave status markers. So this is a unit activation test where you're trying to activate guys that have disruption markers. You just ignore those for the purposes of passing the test. It's a one-time bump. So this is a more aggressive path. Perform a free march move. March move is a double move with any friendly unit which has already received an activation die. So after they've moved and it's now, you've moved on and you're later in the turn, these guys can sprint an extra 10 inch, well, depending on how fast they are, they can make another double move. And then target an enemy unit which has a brave status markers on it. Remove one from that unit, but the unit must take a brave test. In other words, remove a disruption marker, take a courage test. And then the last one is cancel one enemy dispel attempt. So when your spellcaster tries to cast a spell, the enemy doesn't get to dispel it. So these are far more aggressive, far more in your face. Interesting. Depending on the army list you've got, depending on the scenario that you're, like if you choose one of these, your opponent chooses the scenario. So if you choose the defensive version of these, which I think is generally the ever living, he can choose a scenario where you don't want to be on the defensive. So there's a little bit of a counter move going on here. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we need to talk about, and now that we got the one-time uses out of the way, let's take a look at how this choice affects your secondary objective. The second thing we need to analyze with respect to alignment are the devotions to the way. That's the kind of lore, fancy way of saying secondary objectives. Each of these alignments has 8 secondary objectives that they may get to use. And I need to talk a little bit about the physical, tactile nature of how this is done. If you get the starter set, then you will have 2 sets of 8 cards. Each card has one of the secondary objectives on it. You, as a player, will select 3 cards from your alignment deck, and each card will have a secondary objective on it, and then you get to pick one of those 3. So of the 8, and we'll talk about what the 8 are, you will get to choose from among 3 of them selected at random, and then you may or may not want to tell your opponent which secondary objective you are pursuing. These may be things like, and again, it depends strongly on the flavor of the game that you've chosen. For example, and some of these have mirror images of each other. So for example, the devotions to the way of ever living, you're looking for the fountain of youth. You nominate 2 terrain objectives and you move somebody into that objective. And if they spend an action, pass a bravery test, they found the fountain of youth. Oh, if it's not there, it's definitely the other one. Move a unit in there, pass a brave check. You found it. Hey, you score victory points. On the other side, the path of the ever changing, you nominate 2 units And when you get into melee with the first of those units, you pass a bravery check. And if you pass, then that unit has the map to El Dorado. And if you beat them up, you can steal the map. Of course, if you fail that initial bravery test, it's the other guys that have it. You got to send somebody over there to beat them up and take the map. And your player may not realize that he has the map of El Dorado. That's just kind of a flavor text. It could be anything, right? It could be a map to the the secret there, or the explanation for the Cahokia Mounds, if you must. What else we got? So for the Path of the Ever Living, you have control jungle territory. If you control a table quarter on the opponent's side of the battlefield, in other words, you have more units there. So cut their half of the table in half, left and right. If you've got more units on the left side than they do, then you score one at the end of the game. You score one victory point. It's at the end of a game turn. So you can score a victory point for every turn, and then at the end of the game, if you control more table quarters than your opponent, you score more victory points. So take and hold. On the other side, if you are following the devotions to the ever changing, you may have Head of the Snake. You score one victory point when a humanoid or heroic figure wounds the enemy general. Score one if the enemy general is killed or fleeing. So every wound that you delivers a victory point. Remember, the primary objectives, they may only score you 4 or 5 victory points. A general that's got 3 wounds, you're scoring 4 victory points just by beating him up alone. So you may be able to, even if you're getting thumped in the primary objectives, this is where you can win. Of course, you have to pick the right one. If you build your entire army list around the idea of, well, I'm going to go after the Head of the Snake, but you don't draw that card, it's not going to do you any good. If you build your whole army list around what synergizes really well with the Path of the Ever Changing, and then your opponent wins the dice off and chooses Ever Changing, you're stuck with the Ever Living, which may not have the same kind of interplay and killer combos that you have. Let's see what else we got. For the Ever Changing, we've got Trophy Hunters. If you kill an enemy monster, behemoth, or heroic figure, you drop a trophy token. If you can grab that, if you control it at the end of the game, if you can get it off the table, you score another victory point. So a couple of victory points there. So this really changes the nature of the game. And it provides an interesting sort of balance in that you want to be able to build a force that is both good at something. Like, I really like static, shooty armies. You can build an army that does that. But if your opponent knows that, he may try to choose a scenario that's all about taking ground. And that means you can't turtle up if you expect to win. So that's how you have to be a little bit more flexible. It's not to say that you can't build a turtle army. Just be aware that some games are going to be a lot harder than others for you. Or you might want to look for some ways to at least alleviate the liabilities of being an army that turtles up in one corner of the table. The other thing we can talk about, and here I'll point out, the force that I have chosen to start with is the tribal nations, the eastern United States forest tribes. These are the guys, I guess I should say, in keeping with the lore, the eastern portion of what would later come to be known as the United States. That's the guys that I'm going to go with. So I'm going to show you an example of how the spell lists change based on what your alignment is. And that's what's on the screen right now. Spellcasting reminds me a little bit of Warhammer Fantasy Battles 6th edition. You pick one of your spells, you roll 2d10, and you're trying to get under a target number. Your opponent can then try to dispel if he's within 24 inches, and I think line of sight, don't quote me on that. If he can roll lower than you, then your spell doesn't get off. He managed to disrupt your spell casting. If you roll double ones, he can't roll under you. You get the spell off automatically. If he rolls double ones, he automatically dispels, unless you roll double ones, in which case the spellcaster gets the spell off. Okay, everybody gets 2 spells. And in my case, my faction, the Tribal Nations, will get Regrowth of the Woods. Nominate a point on the table and immediately place a forest at that point. Nice. Let's get a casting value of 16, not too hard. A little harder, Deepening Shadows. Nominate a couple of units. It's actually, spellcasters have a level. So a level 3 caster nominates 3 units. Level 2 caster nominates 2. Those units now have the stealth ability, and you can imagine what that means. I don't know off the top of my head, so I'm not going to worry about it. Instead, I'm going to turn my attention to what are the 2 spells that he gets if he is on the way of the ever-living. There's 2 of them, Shifting of the Woods and Protection of the Woods. Shifting of the Woods, you nominate a unit that is wholly within a forest. They instantly teleport to any other forest. Not bad. Protection of the Woods, nominate any unit within line of sight, remove D3 Brave status markers. Those are the disruption markers. You can think of them as disruption markers. So heal or long distance teleport, subject to being inside the forest. On the path of the ever-changing, however, you have something called the Vengeance of the Woods. Nominate a point within the woods. An enemy unit within 3 inches of that point suffers D3+1 hits. The trees open their eyes and start shouting "Burrum" and swinging great big honking logs. It's actually classed as a shooting attack, so the enemy does get to make an armor check on that one. You also have Despair of the Woods, and in this case, rather than pulling 3 disruption markers off your unit, you drop 3 disruption markers on an enemy unit. And they don't have to be in the woods in this case. So once again, which of those 2 sets of spells do I want to teleport and heal, or do I want to attack and disrupt? Well, what you want doesn't really matter. It's what you wind up with. So that's it for spell casting. And then we can take a look at this big boy right here. This is the Wendigo. And he's one of the behemoths. He is, you can get him online for, I think it's $60 for this guy. He is enormous and just a really good-looking figure. If you're playing D&D, you're probably going to want to pick this guy up because your players won't know what hit them. Wendigo, if he is following the Blessings of the Way, he gains the dodge talent, and his movement is 6. So he's faster, and he's harder to shoot. Again, more staying power because you're on the path of the ever-living. If you are on the path of the ever-changing and you have a Wendigo in your roster, anytime you pull your lowest value unit activation die, remember you're rolling D6s, and when you pull that lowest value, you can assign it to the Wendigo as an on-alert unit action. So I've got 6 unit, I've got 6 dice. That lowest die, when it comes to that, I can dump it on him. Oh, at any time you can pull that. So it's early in the turn. I can pull that let. Now I'm going to lose an activation, but my big boy is now on guard, and he's basically on Overwatch. So if anybody moves near him, he can pounce. Pretty powerful, but again, these are mutually exclusive. He either is Speedy Gonzalez, the Wendigo, or he is the Tasmanian Devil, right? He's going to be one of those 2. And it all depends on which one you wind up with way at the beginning of the game. So hopefully, now that we've talked about these 4 aspects of alignment, you can see how focusing primarily on, well, what are the scenarios like? They're certainly not line them up and run at each other. It's almost secondary because this is going to drive how you play out each scenario. And again, I'll close by just pointing out, I haven't actually played a game of this start to finish, top to bottom, using all of these rules yet. But just going through the exercise of looking at how these different aspects of alignment intersect, I'm impressed with the game design. I'm impressed with how much it wants you to engage with the rules and how much it wants you to use these things. It rewards you for paying attention to them and implementing them at the table. Really solid design here. Really looking forward to getting it on the table. And if you think I'm wrong about any of these things, if I misspoke, any rates or any of that stuff, feel free. Leave a comment. God bless you. I'm praying for you.